welcome everybody to this week's episode of Beyond Borders with Better Go. I'm super excited to have Shelly here today with us to talk about her experiences and the mobility world. Shelly, would you like to do a little bit intro to yourself?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time, and I know the topic is relevant and timely, and especially delving into some of these, post-COVID issues. We're really talking about what the landscape looks like today. Um, Michael, you said my name was Shelly James. I have been in the mobility and immigration space for a little over 25 years, which makes me a relic, but I'm not going to date myself. But it has given me
Experienced.
right, exactly. It has given me the opportunity to see a lot of flowing changes throughout our industry. Our global mobility and immigration industry is very small. Everybody knows everybody. I like to say we tend to, work with people. Uh, if you haven't worked with them, they'll work for you, or you'll work for them. But it's a very small niche group, and it's been great over the years to see how that has evolved and how mobility has changed, especially within, um, the different regions. I've had many opportunities to work for some really large companies, some medium companies, some small companies. I've worked for Big Four with KPMG. I've worked for Hewlett Packard. Most recently, I've been with Amazon, um, which was an interesting experience. And I've also worked on the other side, the professional services side of things, working with Barry Appleman Leiden from an immigration perspective, and then working with Altair Global from a relocation perspective. So I've very purposely taken my career into directions where I could build my resume out to have experience on both the professional services side and the in-house corporate side. So I like to say that I've been given the opportunity to have some great things throughout my career that really took shape over the different changing landscape of global mobility.
Wonderful. And not only just the changing landscape, but the perspective from A to Z. You've got a 360 view of what mobility looks like. And as we cover a couple of themes today, which is talking about your own personal experiences, designing employee programs, and even a super interesting case study that you have about talent divestiture with HP, one of the first questions I wanted to ask about is mobility, especially from a regional perspective, how it changes and what does it look like? And in result, what's that impact on the employee experience?
Yeah, that's a good way to start off. So, the regional experience, it all comes down to money, right? The companies, whether they want to spend it, whether they don't want to spend it, whether they're restrictive with their policies, whether they're liberal with their policies, different regions tend to act upon and treat global mobility differently depending on what the company is involved in. So you got your East Coast, which is mainly, for the most part, financial companies, Big Four, um, all the financial companies that you take a look at, um, Goldman Sachs, um, all the Big Four, E&Y, Price Waterhouse, all of them, really kind of take a look at their policies and build them out from well, it used to be from a very liberal perspective. Travel wasn't really a problem. They were a client based, a lot of financial companies are client based. They want to meet their client needs. So they think nothing about, putting their employees on a plane to meet, the client need and have meetings and knowledge shares for wherever the client needs you. Central, really, oil and gas, that's another very big money impact, lots of money there, lots of employee perspective. Still, companies want to meet their client need, but they also want to take security measures and make sure their employees are safe, wherever they send them into the places where the oil and gas industry is big. You've got your Midwest, which is auto, coal industry. You're going to have some liberal policies, especially pre-COVID, but you're also, they're going to be a little tighter than some of the financial companies from my perspective, what I've seen. Then you've got your West Coast, which is big tech. And, everybody knows big tech makes the world go around. AI is incredible right now with everything that you can do. And most of the companies that you see out on the West Coast are going to be involved some way or another in the big tech industry. I know post-COVID, you'd had a lot of companies who were very liberal with travel policies and, would make sure that their employees could meet client needs wherever they needed to go. So depending on where you wanted to send them, East Coast, West Coast, South, Midwest, it really made a difference on whether that was business driven or whether it was employee driven. You saw a lot of business driven business decisions being made by companies who really needed to have their employees go where their clients really needed them. And then their policies really reflected that. Not so much the policies that allowed a lot of flexibility for employee-driven moves. When an employee had a need for maybe their spouse got transferred, to another state and they needed to go, they would approach their company. And sometimes the companies would allow them, sometimes they wouldn't, but it was a lot more, companies would allow them a lot more to go back pre-COVID, more so nowadays. I just, the policies that companies have today, whether they have the 18-month sponsorship policies where they're bringing on candidates who really need foreign nationals who really need sponsorship with temporary or even permanent. I think they used to allow, them to be sponsored without a second look. Nowadays, I think they're looking a lot harder into whether or not they're even going to take candidates who need that sponsorship or not. So it depends on
Especially
what
with the
region
wait
you go.
lists.
Exactly.
Especially with the wait list these
Yeah.
days with H1, it's a bigger decision to understand how long they're going to sponsor that and how long it's going to take to bring on talent. I love that you're
Right.
mentioning the different regions across the U.S. in terms of when I'm listening to you talk about the difference between East Coast versus West Coast, et cetera, in terms of business strategies and focus. I see that trickle down to the corporate culture as well, and how that is actually influencing policy and even decisions like whether it's a employee initiated move or if it's actually a company. And we saw this, and I'm based in Texas. We saw this in Texas, where companies like ExxonMobil, they set up shop about 10 minutes down the road from where I live, and they put out a directive: everyone's to come here. This is going to be headquarters moving forward, and you have XYZ date to get here. And if you're not here by that date, you no longer have your position. So there was a lot of different approaches to that mobility, but you can understand too that if it's the company's decision to move employees, they're going to provide a much different support mechanism in terms of relocation packages,
Yes.
etc., than they would if an employee's like, hey, my spouse moved here, I'm going to move and then I'll do my job remote. What I've seen personally is that most companies have offered short-term stints where they're phasing that employee out. And they said, listen, we understand this is move. It's a personal move. It's not covered by the company. It's not initiated by the company. We, wish you the best. We want to sponsor you for that transition, but you have this much time you can go, but then you'd be phased out to either a different role, different team, or even completely out of the company. And you see that a little bit more so internationally, but I think often too, from a cultural perspective, and now we're talking not just corporate culture, but kind of the way we live and interact with others, that often we think of this as some big foreign entity, like we have to cross a national border and get a stamp on our passport to have this kind of cross-cultural experience. But it's really not true. I mean, folks moving from New York to the Bay Area versus folks moving from Idaho into Texas, that's going to be a struggle. And I remember some colleagues talking about it when a lot of the big Texas-based projects were coming into place and corporations were moving either headquarters or significant amount of productivity within Texas, they actually had a campaign to employees of how to make Texas attractive for Bay Area folks to want to move and live there. Super interesting. It's really, really interesting aspect to it because that implies everything about from the design on policy, flexibility. You were talking about how liberal employee policies can be, how inclusive they can be in the sense of, and not so much in the D&I perspective of inclusive, but inclusive more in the sense of benefits. And that has a huge impact on that. Moving on to another point in that relocation experience and scale is one of the questions that we'd like to ask is from your perspective in understanding the employee experience transitioning. We provide mobility mentors or counselors that help them through that experience. How important do you think that is in the experience of the employee and the role of that actual relocation? Does it have an impact, or what kind of impact could that have?
That has an incredible impact on whether or not you have a successful employee move, or not. I think it's been the age-old question is return on investment, right? Do you have a return on investment? This is what, from a company perspective, do you have a return on investment for that employee? If you're going to move them, even moving them from California to New York, let alone, let's not talk about moving them from New York to Germany, or New York to India. Are you going to have a return on investment, especially with your higher level employees, such as your executives, or even your senior managers, or your vice presidents? Are they going to have a good experience, and are they going to want to be with the company within 6 months, 18 months, 2 years after they return, right? That return on investment is huge. And I think the number one first thing that you need to talk about, or to even consider, is mobility mentor. Who is there to answer questions, talk about culture, talk about some of the pitfalls that they might run into that you wouldn't necessarily expect as an employee traveling from one place to another, especially if you haven't traveled for or relocated for a company very often. It's a big deal. It's a life-changing deal to move from one country to another. And a global mobility mentor can help you get in there, look at things from a different perspective, get you ready for your taxes, get you ready for your relocation, get you set up in schooling for your children, even even your pets. You might not think, is it a big, some of these families have pets, and they need to move them along as well. All of these things, these little things, kind of are dumped into a soup, and whether you bring that soup to a boil, and if it's a good tasting soup or not, time will tell. But all those factors really make a difference when you have a global mobility mentor who can walk you through each stage. And when I talk about each stage, I'm talking not just in the beginning when you're getting somebody ready to move, in the middle. How are you doing? You just went through your first tax payment season. How did that go? Do you need any help? After you're getting ready to come back and repatriate, what kind of considerations do you need to make for transitioning your child back into school back into the US, or in another country? All those things take into consideration what a mobility counselor can do, or a mobility uh, person can do to help that person make the most of their mobility experience. I think if you don't have one set up to help guide somebody through a relocation, that can really be to the detriment of that person's experience. And the number one reason you want to have somebody go into relocate is to make the company money, right? And if they are focusing on their move instead of focusing on their job and what they need to do, it's not going to make for a very good experience.
It is, and I love that you're talking about that experience for the employee. When designing programs from the corporate perspective and putting all these moving pieces together, you mentioned tax, you mentioned, but there's so many things. Your background is immigration as well. There's a lot of wonderful providers that have an expertise in each of these categories. But from the assignee's perspective, the transferee's perspective, it's almost like a soup where everything's kind of getting thrown in together, where having some support or guidance through that can be a game changer. But from a planning and perspective from your side, how do you develop a program based on employee experience? What are some of the things that you're looking at? What are some things that you feel are valuable? And even from your own experience from relocating across the United States too, what do you feel is a valuable components to developing a successful mobility program employee experience?
Yeah, and I think so many people get caught up into whether or not you're a small company, a medium company, or a large company. And if you're a small company, you really have to struggle to make sure that you have good components to have a good, strong program. I don't actually take that perspective. I think if you're small, you can be small and mighty. You can, roll up your sleeves, however many people you have, whether it's just you, whether you have one or two other people. Um, the key is to have very good, strong policies in place. So writing work instructions to make sure that your internal employees, your global mobility, your immigration, your relocation employees, have good, strong resources to use, and then also have good, strong partners, vendor partners, people who can help you along. If you're a small company, those are going to be your vendor partners are going to be key because they're going to be doing all the heavy lifting, right? So if you're a medium to larger company, maybe you're used to doing a little more heavy lifting, and that's okay. You probably have the resources, you probably have the technology in place um, to do that, but your vendors are going to be key no matter what size you are, in order to make sure that your program runs smoothly, your employees have somebody to talk to, immigration providers, relocation providers, tax providers, who are the subject matter experts and really can get in there and help with whatever problems get escalated. And so that they can take care of those. The other thing is, I think, a communication plan. Whether you're small, whether you're large, have a communication plan in place so that you can send out regular notifications to folks to let them know, be transparent about what's going on. If there are, changes within the company that are going to affect your global mobility population or your immigration population, you know, uh, I think H-1B cap is a good example for that. H-1B cap every year, I make it a point starting about October-ish, November-ish, start sending out those little reminders, save the date. We're going to start, pinging our employees who need to be sponsored for the H-1B cap and get businesses ready and aligned to start spending some money, know who their employee population is that they're going to spend money on, what those costs may look like, what the needs may be, but a good strong communication plan goes along with that as well, I think.
How important do you think, perhaps from the employee's perspective, is knowing the why behind the policy development and the structure that you mentioned? It's really important to provide a concise and experience that is mapped out so that's consistent. How involved have employees been perhaps in the past in understanding the development of these? And more so, do you think it's important for them to understand the why these policies exist, why this is structured this way? Do you think that that's an impact on their experience if they understand that?
I think the why is imperative. Um, I think that from a company perspective, if you develop policies and they're just blanket policies for you to throw out on some website for resourcing and direct employees to that website without really articulating why those policies are in place, it's very cyclical. Our global mobility, our immigration, all those landscapes are very cyclical. And whether or not the company has the wherewithal or the money to develop, their employees at the time. It really depends on, the cycle of their employee development at that stage. You have to be able to tell an employee why that particular policy is in place. Inevitably, you're going to say, well, our travel policies won't allow you to make business travel at this time. Why? That's the next question. The employee is always going to ask why.
Usually, right?
So you have to be able to back that up with, you know, businesses are tight with the purse strings, budgets are being looked at right now, whatever the case may be. And that answer can change. That answer can change on depending on what your business looks like at the time. But if you lay out a blanket policy and you don't have a why behind it, you're going to get stuck as a person, as an escalation point. You're going to get stuck when inevitably the employee is going to ask, why can't we do this at this time? Why can't I be sponsored for that green card right now? Why can't, I've been here for 2 years. Why can't I move forward with an EB2 immigration, sponsorship for my green card? Lots and lots of different factors affect those. So just pick a few and make sure you have the why behind whatever policy so it can support
Yeah.
that policy
It sounds
program.
like it sounds like that's also a great opportunity to show the expertise, and I actually advocate for the mobility department because when you get those questions, you're going to have the backup and understanding. If an employee says, "Well, why can't I just?" I've got a home in, let's say Mexico, and why can't I just move there for 6 months and I'll work remote? And when they just hear no, that you can't, that's not company policy, to be honest, it's fair and it's enough. I mean, the company doesn't have to rationalize itself, to be fair. However, it does help in understanding those situations where it's like, well, this is the reason, because of the tax exposure, because of the liability, because of the X, Y, Z, a lot of the reasons. But beyond that, you were even talking about the H-1Bs and in the line for immigration. It's super important because it's not just the employee's job on the line here. It's like their entire family. Like, well, if I have to leave the country, do I have to pull my kid out of school? Like,
Right.
what are we going to do? We just signed a lease that's 12 months and I can't break it. And I'm going to lose a month of deposit. Like, all these kind of aspects are tied into it. So it's so important for them to understand the why, but it's also such a great opportunity for the mobility teams to show like their expertise. Like, this is why, this is backing, this is the reasoning, this is the details that we've pulled together to educate you on and explain the policies and things like that. Talking about projects and policies and all that kind of stuff, what if we kind of blow up the zoom and step back a little bit and go to a higher level in understanding how this affects companies, especially in the terms of M&As, mergers and acquisitions, or even the change of business units, which you have an amazing, last time we talked, we had a great conversation around this. This is absolutely imperative. And we find actually in some of the very large mergers that happened in the last year and a half, mobility departments will hold in the process of deciding the entities and employees and all that kind of stuff. And you had this experience with HPE and how you manage the talent and that aspect. So can we take a look at that case study project with HPE and explain, maybe first start with the high level, like what was the goal, what was happening at HPE at the time, what were you trying to achieve, and then we can dive into how you actually did that.
Yeah. So I was not fortunate enough to work at HP at a very interesting time in their history for sure. Um, I was there for a total of 7 years. For the first 3 years, I worked as a normal America's Global Mobility Manager responsible for immigration, relocation, and tax. Any other global mobility person would tell you the same. You go in, you manage, your America's region, your APAC region, your EMEA region, and you just do your thing, right? That's what I did. Our CEO at the time decided that she wanted to divest the company into 4 separate entities. Now, not only did she want to divest the company into 4 separate entities, but she wanted to do this in a very short period of time. We had a year to 12 months to make this happen. And it was, a a period of time that was very stressful. We had to totally relook at what our policies look like. In particular, had to step back from my day-to-day role, and luckily at the time I had a really, really great, strong team who was able to, keep the wheels moving and keep the wheels on the bus, right, and keep the cogs going. We very quickly stepped back. We developed in each region sort of little pods where I had project management with a project team, with HR, with business stakeholders, with facilities, HP business leaders who we met pretty much every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, to talk about our population of people, what it meant, who was going to move, who were we going to terminate, who were we going to, offer jobs in other countries that would allow. We had to take a look at quotas, country quotas. There were countries out there who only allowed so many foreign nationals at a time. We had to step back and take a look at skill sets and what employees at what level would have the right skill set to move into the country that would support the office location that we had in that country. Sometimes we had office locations that we had to shut down, and we would have, a few thousand employees. That meant we either had to relocate them or send them on their way. And if we had to send them on their way, what did that look like? Do we set up, post-employment opportunities for these employees? Did we offer, termination assistance for our foreign nationals? Did we offer, over and beyond just plane tickets home, but did we offer them, relocation or some type of severance that would allow them to uproot their family and send them on their way? There were lots of different things that we had to take into consideration, and my America's pod or project team, we took the America's population of people and worked with the other 2 regions to see where were we going to place these people, what it was going to look like. We worked with very closely with local governments, departments of labor, embassies, consulates. What did it look like to move these folks very quickly into countries or out of countries where we couldn't place them any longer?
And in just 12 months, you were saying to have this done. It wasn't like, let's plan this, let's get an action
Yeah.
plan. In 12 months, we'll revisit and talk about what this going to look like. This is like, we got to action this. So one massive organization, about how many employees was it at that time? If you were to, off the top of your head, a couple thousand at least, right?
It was about 2,500 in the Americas that we
Okay.
were considering. This was just foreign national folks. We're not talking about the huge number that HR had to deal with trying to figure out, whether or not they were going to keep these employees or not. Pretty much about, 2,500 folks that we were looking at
Wow.
just in this region. And then we were talking about EMEA and APAC as well. I worked with my colleagues, EMEA and the APAC manager, to see what we needed to do if we were going to swap out employees or what that looked like too. We
Wow.
did actually get it done in a
That's
12-month period.
amazing.
Now, HP did divest into 4 separate companies, and that happened over a period of a few years. But that first initial push, that was 12 months, and we did it. We turned ourselves from HP into HPE. I myself went to work for HPE. Some of my team members went to work for DXC. Some of my team members went to work for Focus, and it was an interesting time, to be sure.
I can see I'm just trying to map that out in my own understanding of what that would look like, because you've got directive happening, you've got data collection happening, you've got a conversation and back and forth in terms of not just immigration but legal. You said you're talking to governments as well, so you have to provide that information back to the business units. Where was this data to begin with? Did you have to extract it? Did you have to go out and survey the teams? Like, I think that's a critical element because a lot of individuals want to enact change in their teams, but the greatest hurdle is collecting enough data to make those informed decisions. So if we start at that point, like what was the case scenario and how did you manage that?
Data analytics was so critical. You had to make sure to begin with that your uh, data analytics were bulletproof. You go and you punch holes in your data and see where your weak spots are. But that's why it was so critical to have even the size of a company like Hewlett Packard. We were so lucky and so fortunate to have vendor partners that could help us with um, getting the data and quantifying it and making sure that we had good data integrity. HP's data was good at the time, but we relied on our immigration partners, our relocation partners, our tax partners to really take a look at um, their data and provide us the numbers and what that looked like, so we could do comparisons to make sure that we had bulletproof scenarios that we could build around the data.
Yeah, exactly, because that's the foundation. Right now, you have to, like you said, build those scenarios on top of that.
Yeah, exactly. And we did. We were fortunate. It wasn't the most fun I had in my career. And this isn't me just saying this. I know I tell people a lot. I'm very fortunate to have worked for HP at the time I did. Do I ever want to work during a time where we are divesting that quickly and into that many companies? Probably not, but I will not trade it for the world. It gave me so much experience that I would never have thought I would have been able to garner as just a true global mobility or an immigration. It gave me, I became very quickly a data expert, a analytical expert, uh, organizational change expert. It was true. Uh, I was able to take all that experience and just mold it into what I have been able to accomplish today. But it was very, very interesting time, to be sure.
Wow. If we were to take those elements and almost lay them out as like a blueprint, we know that enacting any change within a team or organization, one of the key factors is the adoption in terms of the mission and the vision. Luckily, at HP at the time, you had the CEO of the company that was directing that, so it was kind of helped take care of that. But then there's also the extensive list of the tactical that needs to get done in terms of execution. So if you could lay out those key points from a high level perspective, we talked a little bit about data, but what are some other things you think are critical elements in making that blueprint so that you can do a transition or a change within an organization that's successful?
I think there are three things. Um, from a very high perspective, we talked about data analytics. You have to have bulletproof data. Whether you're a small company, whether you're a mid-level company, whether you're a high-level company, your data has to be bulletproof. So that taking a look at that, because that's where you build from there. That you take that data and you have to build your policies and you have to mold your structure around that data. Second, I think is your policies and your um, you know documents for frequently asked questions, and the people who back those up, your team members, are they you know policy experts for what you're laying down at the time. Your policies have to be very flexible, very amiable, very you have to be able to take them and roll with whatever comes up with at the time. So your policies You have to be able to change. They have to be able to change and mold with the direction you're trying to take them. Making sure that you have policies written out to begin with is imperative. I don't think you can fly by the seat of your pants, whether you're a small company, a medium company, or a large company. You have to have written policies somewhere. And I know that can be a real pain to be able to take time to write down your policies and make them, make them resourceful and flexible so that any employee can look at those wherever you have placed them and say, okay, I can use that. The third thing is a communication plan. You have to have a communication plan. Whether you're trying to move a small group of people, a medium group of people, or a larger group of people, your communications are key. Communications to your employee population, communications to your stakeholder and population, communications within your own infrastructure, and communication between your vendors. You have to have a good communication plan and know when you're going to release those communications, what those communications are going to look like. I know I fell into this trap when I was younger in my career, putting a lot of data into a communication and people don't read it. It's all of a sudden you get blind to these communications that come out, and you want people to read them. You put really great information in there, but people don't read them. They don't have the time. So you make them short and sweet, and make sure that it hits all the elements that you want to hit without overwhelming people with a lot of information. Good communication plan. Those are the three things, I think. If you have those three things, you can build whatever structure you need from those three things, I think.
That's fantastic. And I love that you mentioned too a little bit of the information overload, because I like to see it as a horizon. Like when you look down the road, how far can you see before it gets hazy? Because you do have
Yeah.
to be very careful in providing too much. And what happens is the message kind of gets lost at the end.
Mm.
So impacting that. But I imagine the communication plan also includes the stages of when and how, what types of communication can be provided, not all at once, but providing it as a resource and a go-to for the future.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. And I wonder how in the future we'll see, with right now a lot of the kind of AI assisted robots, et cetera, that are being developed in-house for companies are searching for this. So you can have pop-up questionnaires that people can just do a quick look in. Sounds like you might have some ideas on that as well.
Well, yeah, so from a program manager, AI is probably the best thing since sliced bread, right? Because you can take a bot, and you can create a bot that will help you spit out communications or direct people to where your resource library is, or answer the top 10 most frequently asked questions that employees might have or stakeholders might have. Bots can do all that, and that's great, because then you can take your employee you can take your global mobility employees and really use them for the great breadth and wealth of knowledge that they have, and get their expertise out there for relocation, for tax, for immigration. Let them use their brain power for what it's intended to use it to be used for, right? The three major things in global mobility. Now, from an employee perspective, uh, where AI might be um, a little unusual and might be a little hard to take, is, do you or are you able to talk with a human being? If you have a critical move question, is it going to be filtered off to a bot that answers your question, and it doesn't necessarily guide you to a person who can feed the compassion and get you a result that you were looking for your children's school or your pet's vet? Or a bot isn't necessarily going to take care of that, right? So there is a real need for a person at the other end of that who can really feed the compassion and help with answering questions or bringing somebody through that relocation experience or that immigration experience without having a general bot
Yeah, because
interfering.
that can be frustrating as well.
Yeah.
I'll wrap everything up with just one last question about your personal experience in relocating. Is there anything that you've taken away from moving from the various places that you've lived in before and adapt that into your perspective and understanding the experience the employees are having when they're relocating for their employees?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a personal story. So, um, my my husband and I we had decided back in 2019 that we were going to move from Dallas, Texas, which both of us have been here for almost all of our lives. We built our careers here. My husband was born and raised here. We decided we were going to move to Montana. We wanted, to get out of Dodge. We wanted to go to a place that was a little less populated, be in a rural area that would allow us to take deep breaths and not, especially at that time back in 2019, you know COVID was on the horizon and people were just getting really crazy, right? So we decided we were going to do that. um, at the time I was working for a company that you go into an office every day, like most of us did. We'd go into an office, do our thing, come home, and our very much so our family life and our work life was very much separate, right? And we tried to balance them both. I moved during COVID, which I can't. I don't know why we did that, but we did. We survived it. But oh my gosh, it was the worst thing ever. Um, the company at the time wouldn't allow me they didn't have an office in Montana in the area that I was going to work in. So it was agreed upon that I would leave that company and try and find work in Montana. Now, as you can imagine, not a whole lot of opportunities were available for a global mobility HR, immigration, technical person in Montana, right? So you're really going to be looking for contract work or, remote work, something that would allow you to work from home, but still offer the expertise and the knowledge and be of value to some company that was going to be able to use that knowledge. I was very lucky and fortunate that I was able to take uh, a position with Expedia and then with Edwards Life Sciences that were remote. I was able to work in Montana. At the same time, we were looking for a house. My husband and I were looking for a house in Montana. People were snatching from the West Coast and from the East Coast because of COVID. They were snatching properties up sight unseen, 20, 30% over asking. We couldn't compete. And we eventually decided working remotely was great, but we eventually decided we were going to uh, come back to Texas because of the opportunity centrally located that Texas was going to be able to offer from a work perspective, but also from a work or a life perspective, from a balance perspective. I can imagine that the anxieties and the things that I experienced during that time was what a lot of the employees that I work with today are feeling with having to find a home, having to relocate from one state to another, let alone having to relocate from one country to another. That's a different story. And you and I could probably do a whole webcast on that alone. But having to relocate like that and the anxieties, where are we going to live? Are we going to be able to find a rental? Are we going to be able to have our kids? Now, I didn't have any children, but I can be sure that employees that I work with are worrying about school districts and getting folks into good school districts and what that long-term impact would look like for their career. From an employee perspective, I can tell you that move from to Montana and then being there a year and then moving back was probably the best life experience that I could have had, that gave me also great knowledge about what my employees go through on a regular basis, and the anxieties and the trepidations that can befall them when they're trying to make moves like that. It it definitely made me a lot more compassionate. I was a very compassionate person with our employees to begin with, but a lot more compassionate with what they were going through at the time when they have to make a move like that, because it is very trying.
It's not easy. Not easy
No,
at all.
not easy. No.
Well, Shelly, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to dive in to learn about your experiences and your perspective, and also to hear your personal experience with relocation. How would, in the future, if anybody would like to get in touch with you, they want to ask questions about designing programs or designing actually change within their company, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Go on to my LinkedIn page. You can find me under Shelly James, and my LinkedIn page has my all my contact information. Um, I'm also there if you want to reach out, about any opportunities that your company is looking at that you might want to use my expertise or experience for. I'm open to any chats or anything that anybody wants to talk about. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shelly. It's a pleasure to talk with you. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.